Yeah, we left off on the Friday.
All right, everyone take out your assignment. Everyone got their assignment out, make sure your name is on before you turn it in. Let me ask one quick question. So when you get a document like this and get a document, the first thing you got to do is you have to read the title and read the author. Now the author's down the bottom. He went by the Roman Senator Publius, but it's James Madison, the father of the Constitution. You got to do that before you read it. You start reading, then it just becomes words. And since I signed it and we're talking about the Constitution, clearly this is about ratification of the Constitution. So you got to think about those things before you read. If you just start reading this as some kind of thing you just kind of pull from the ether and just started to read, it will make no sense and you won't understand it and it'll be meaningless. Also, one more thing, I'm stealing it again. The utility of the Union as a safeguard against domestic faction and insurrection. So the Union of the States under the Constitution as a safeguard against domestic faction. Faction, bad. Says it right there, against domestic faction. The first question, according to Madison, what are the causes of factions? Great, so he mentions causes of factions. This one really important one, about 3 or 4 other ones. But before you get there, you have to think of something. And I'm sure you did because you answered the question. I can see there's paper, some kind of writing on paper with line. That's really cool. What's the option? So split groups of people. But in the context of government and the Constitution and leadership and laws, what do we call these different groups? Yes, party. These are political parties. They're political parties. We call political parties. So good. It's a faction of political parties. That's what they are. They're parties. So, one more thing. If you look at that third paragraph, you have 2 little quick ones, and then we have all the reasons there might be factions. So, when I mean factions, I mean people dividing up into groups, political parties. What's your number one cause? Yeah.
Differences in men and their beliefs.
He said beliefs, but beliefs about what? That's just one line. Then he goes through, that's not enough. Because you go through and say beliefs about all kinds of stuff. Not enough just to say beliefs. Anybody can copy 5 words there. And I know you know one. I do know for a fact. That's not good enough. Yeah.
I didn't. But I said people differing opinions and ideals.
But we need more on what? Then they list it. You're on the right piece. That's the beginning of the sentence, but then there's more. Yeah. What kind of government it's going to be? And remember, all these people knew the history. So it could be like a monarchy, republic, but then they knew about the history of the 30 Years' War, the English Civil War, these religious wars, and they were worried that it would divide up in, let's say, the Catholic Party and the Protestant Party. They were terrified of religious wars. That was very real to them. That's where our government is secular, not religious. They knew their history. And what's the other reason? Constitution. What kind of government would be? Yeah, but there's even more. What's the biggest cause? Yeah, distribution. Property. Property's the biggest. What's property? Property is wealth. Those with property will be in one party. Those without property will be in another party. And which party will be bigger, having the most people? The one without. And he's saying this government will avoid that dividing up of parties by class. So who's he worried about protecting? People who are going to vote for the Constitution. This is particularly the ratified in the state of New York, are members of the New York State Assembly, by definition only. And he's telling them, vote for this, and your status and your wealth will be protected. I promise there won't be claims. I promise. Was he wrong? Yeah, but the thing about it was, sure. We don't know what he really believed. This is propaganda. He's trying to get the Constitution ratified. He'll say anything. And he kind of did. Doesn't mean it's all wrong, but this is always, Federalist Papers have always been overrated as being like some previous to the way they thought government would be. No, they're just trying to convince people, vote for it, you'll be better off. Look how great it is. So property is the biggest. Then the rest of you, I want to read what you say. I'm looking for if you thought your answers out. And just, yeah, you're pretty perfect, but you thought them out, I'll give you credit. Go turn them in, make sure your name, credit card numbers, right? We got that, social security number. Combination for your locker. I mean, not that I want anything, but I want the power for you. No, you see one. I'll give you. Be late, give it to, I'll give him for school, only 10% off, so. All right. So I will talk about this a little bit more, but we gotta kind of finish up the Constitution. Where did we finish in here?
The graph.
The graph. The diagram. Oh, let me open the window. Might rain on Friday. That's all I got.
It rains every day. Really enjoyed the class.
I better take roll. Somebody forgot to take roll. Yeah. You can slow that line back there.
Yeah, the book is still on, but going off.
Here we go.
We have.
See, like a fish. Or you like, all right, here we go. So, where do we get to signing laws? Do we get to commander in chief? What were those things? Okay, when the president interprets laws, what are those orders? What do we call those? Executive order. It's not law, but it kind of has the force of law because that's how the president interprets laws. And so the 3/5 compromise. So enslaved people are going to be counted as 3/5 of a person towards the population for what two things? It's the House and the Electoral College are together, and taxes, yeah, and taxes. Which section benefited from the 3/5 compromise? The north or the south?
South.
And what did the North call the 3/5 compromise? Because it gave power to the enslavers. Slave power. Jefferson would be called the Negro president because of this. And it just sounds so awkward to say it, but the reason why is because he got his power from slaveholders. Don't read to a lot of logic into the way they said things back in 1801. And the slave trade compromise and the conference clause, the federal government can regulate commerce, but they won't touch what for 20 years? Slave trade. And actually in 1807, the United States would ban the international slave trade. Not that they don't power to enforce it at that time, but they would ban it. But everything had changed by then, so that did not work the way Jefferson thought. Okay, so we got the executive, let's finish this. Was the last one commander in chief?
Yeah.
So we got commander in chief, CIC. And what else? And stuff. Did we get foreign affairs? So foreign affairs. The president speaks for a single voice for foreign affairs. So the president negotiates. For the president, there's a cabinet level official, which makes no sense, but we call our foreign minister the Secretary of State. It makes no sense. We copied it after the Secretary of State from Britain actually dealt with internal affairs within Britain. But for some reason, that's foreign affairs for the US. Foreign affairs. So like yesterday, the president had just met with the prime minister of Israel. Just met yesterday. So that's what the president speaks for the whole country in single voice. And those are the basic functions of the president. We'll get to a few more that are in chats, but it doesn't have a lot listed. But that executive order, that's almost unlimited power. almost unlimited. So my arrows are starting to fade because I've used them for 3 periods now, but let's do the legislating, Article 1. And this one has the most enumerated powers. For enumerated. I got time. The most enumerated powers. The most powers that are listed down. That's partially being checked on the president. So it's telling the president, you can't tax on your own. It's going to be a law passed by Congress. But then the president carries it out. So just to review, we got the House and the Senate. How long's the term for the House? 2 years. How about for the Senate? 6. 6 years. How about for the president?
4.
Hey, how about for a federal judge? Lifetime, not forever. That'd be kind of be scary. It could become immoral.
That was awesome.
Yes.
Depends who the judge is, I guess. So, but here's the big thing. They both must pass the same bill before it goes to the president to be signed into law. They must pass the same bill verbatim. And the problem with that one is, or maybe it's not a problem, maybe it's a facet built in. It is. It's really hard to pass a law. It's really hard. Even if they didn't have the Senate rules they use today, remember I told you about the filibuster requiring 60 votes, it would still be hard to pass a law. And the thought was the House would be crazy and radical because that's the one closest to the people, and we know what riffraff the people are. And then the Senate would be the upper house, and it would tame the instincts, tame the radicalism of the House. It would be a check on the House. So remember checks and balances. And it is. There's going to be so many laws that are going to pass the House, not pass the Senate, that, I mean, arguably could have changed history if they would have passed. But now remember the Senate has 60 votes, the filibuster. So nothing is passed. I mean, literally nothing is passed. It's kind of weird. That's why executive orders are even more important today, because nothing is passed. There are a few, but it's so few, it's weird. If you look compared to when I was your age. So I know what you're saying, well, you're old. Yes, I know. I get it. Let's get through a few. I've already talked a little bit about it. Regulating commerce is a big one. I'm not going to go through every power. The powers are all listed down, and most of you will probably, you can take some kind of, what is it called? American Studies 2 or something like that. Or most of you probably take AP government. Of course, you'll go into much more detail. Regulating commerce. Which one can't you read? Regulate commerce. That's pretty good for me. I'm pretty proud of that. I was going to take a picture of that.
Excited. That's hard.
Next, taxation. So Congress can pass taxation laws, and then the president carries out the taxation. Now, all it said was direct taxation, and you might have heard of an income tax. Well, that concept would have made no sense to somebody in 1780s. This is still pre-capitalism, pre-wage system. And so it doesn't say income tax, and that's going to become really controversial 100 years after this, to where there's an amendment now, the 16th, to allow for an income tax because it's so controversial. But taxation is really important. You can't run a government, and you can't have a currency unless you have taxation. You can't have a financial system unless you have taxation, period. You have anarchy. And then, of course, keeping with that, they can print and borrow money. Print and borrow money. Print and borrow money. And that's how you control the money supply. Now, it never says how you could do that. You know, what do you print money and then what? But they have that, and then they carry it out. Everyone got that concept up here, and they carry it out. And they do things like they create the post office. They do everything from creating naval law. They set up, they call it postal roads, but the highway network eventually become. And they deal with land sales. I'm not going to name every single deal. They deal with what to do in case there's internal rebellion by taking away people's habeas corpus, which I'll tell you about later. They also declare war. And I'm gonna put it over here. They create the military and just as important then, the militia. So they declare war and they actually create the military and high-ranking generals. In fact, high-ranking generals have to be confirmed by Congress and all officers have to be approved by Congress. They literally just give them a list and they sign off. But if you ever heard an officer, you might have heard they're commissioned. That means commissioned by Congress. So they create the military. Now, first thing, let's get to this. The states were really worried about this. State control militia was really important to the states. And as they saw it, they're losing all this power, especially southern states, because of the fear of slave rebellion. They might have an amendment to the Constitution about that fear. And declaring war. The thought was a president could use their power of commander-in-chief to go into war as a tyrant, because they all knew one very important thing. War always, inevitably, that's the word, leads to tyranny. War leads to tyranny. You crack down on your population because everyone has to be for the war. War is always one of the first elements that any totalitarian dictators will do. They'll go to war, and that gives them an excuse to crack down. Have you heard of Putin? Moving on. When's the last time the US has declared war, though? World War II. The United States has not declared war since World War II yet. We've been at war for much of my life. I was born in the middle of one war. And you guys were born in the middle of two. And we're still technically, even though not a lot of number of forces, but there's still fighting going on involving US forces. We still have troops in Syria fighting now. And so there's been no declaration of war. So Congress has the constitutional duty. What have they done? We're scared. We don't want to make brave decisions. So we're just going to act like we'll just appropriate money and let the president do it. So they're not doing their constitutional duty. That's one of the breakdowns of the system, isn't it? That was going to be a check, all these powers, but if Congress doesn't do it, it's not a check. And they get more power. So these are all powers. And I could keep going, but I just wanted to get a few down. But there's one more you have to get down. I'm going to write it right here. It's called the necessary and proper clause. And that's the biggest one. So, they're writing the Constitution in 1787, and they have no idea what the future would be, and they're thinking logically. They don't want to have too many powers down, because that leads to being inflexible. It might also curtail free enterprise if they have all these rules written down already in the Constitution. How do you get around it? So it has to be pretty flexible. And they have no idea what the system's going to be in 15 years. Remember, they thought slavery was going to be gone in 20 years. That's what they thought. So they had no idea what it would be like in 20, 30. They had no idea the Industrial Revolution, which would literally change everything. A totally different world this time. They just heard rumbles and they were afraid. So they added this. Let me read it for you. To make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers, and all other powers vested by the Constitution in the government of the US. So you can do whatever is necessary and proper to do all your other powers. So you can do what is necessary and proper to regulate commerce or taxation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So how does this work in practice? Remember I mentioned money? So you print money, now you have like boxes of currency. How do you distribute it? Yeah, helicopter and drop it on people. Might have been difficult in 1787. Maybe stand on the street corners and throw money at people. Maybe dig it in a deep hole and have people dig it out. How do you distribute money? You need a bank. You need a national bank. But nowhere in the Constitution does it say the federal government can build a bank. But it's necessary. Or the other word, this clause has 3 names. It's a big one, that's 3 names. It is what we call an implied power. It's implied we can build a national bank. Hey, speaking of that, you're all very intelligent. You're well read. What is the national bank today? It's created in 1913. Yep, the Federal Reserve. Yep. And that's the one that has some control over the money supply. And if you ever look at a dollar bill, it says Federal Reserve note on it. So they're the ones who issue the currency.
Why is it only common?
Oh, there's different branches. There's 12 branches of the Federal Reserve Bank around the United States. Then that distributes to member banks. And so Helena is in the Minneapolis district. And so we have a branch of that Minneapolis district. That's all, just to distribute money. And then it regulates banks. It's a really powerful institution. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say that. It's implied. And that's why under the Commerce Clause, that's why there doesn't say there could be a minimum wage. It wouldn't make no sense to have a minimum wage in 1787. It's pre-capitalism. But there's a minimum wage passed in 1938. Why? Implied power under the Commerce Clause. Pollution, Commons. Social Security. The old age pension that everybody gets who works in the United States and pays the tax on it. Passed in 1935. Implied power. So many things that we just take for granted. Any aid for education doesn't say that. Constitution, it's an implied power. It's all implied. Or healthcare, like Medicare, health insurance for people 65 and older, implied power with the Commerce Clause. And so that's why they also give it one more name, a clever name, the Elastic Clause. Get it? Get it? Because it gets stretched.
Did they do that? Not that elastic was a pen and newspaper.
Oh, no. No, Robert. They had, so their things are elastic. That term was they were calling it that in the early 19th century. And then when they vulcanized rubber, that's when you started getting rubber bands in the 1850s. But I bet you never thought we'd start talking about rubber bands in history of them. Let me talk about vulcanized rubber. So it's a lot of power, but that makes it almost unlimited here. But if there's more power for Congress to pass laws, who actually gets more power? The executive. Almost any interaction, 99% of all interactions you're going to have with the federal government, and you have very few, will be with, you might have a few more, the executive branch. Almost everything's executive branch. Post office, executive branch. You go to the airport, TSA, executive branch. Park Service, Forest Service, executive branch. So it's all from the president down to the police, well, depends what police. And we'll get to it, that's called federalists. The federal police, like the FBI or US Marshal Service, executive branch. All executive branch. Yeah.
Again, is this clause, executive and legislative?
It's only in Article 1.
So it's legislative.
So it's only legislative. But if they can pass more laws, that allows them to write executive orders about those laws. So it's how it gets both. Yeah. But it's only in Article 1. Let's do the last one very quickly. We'll put it over here, then I'll connect it. The judicial. Article 3. There's nothing in Article 3. It's actually kind of amazing. There's so much in Article 1. Article 2 has the most important function. You have just powered, really worried about controlling it. And then the judicial, that's supposed to be Article. Just imagine that's an R. Does that help you imagine it? Article 3. All it basically does is it federal cases. So at the national level, and I'll explain how they came up with federal in a sec. And the final court of appeals. Other than that, it says there'll be a Supreme Court and it says there'll be a federal court system, but that's it. It never says what it will do, what its parameters, how many members. That's not in the Constitution at all. So that's your basic government. But remember, the big thing are the checks and balances. So let's do those really quickly. So from the executive to the legislature. What if they don't sign a law? What is that called?
Veto.
A veto. They also have with Teddy Roosevelt called the bully pulpit. He was the first president to really use it. So pulpit, his point of view was thinking about an Episcopalian church with a minister's room. That's the pulpit. And to bully to him, what that meant is either good or literally to bully somebody, to get them to do what you want. The president has the power to influence because anything the president says becomes news. The president says it, it's reported. And that gives the president great amount of power to influence. They say it, they'll report it. It could be true, it could be not true, it doesn't matter. It can be legitimate, not legitimate. They will report it. And so the president can always influence, always intimidate or persuade. They have that great power to do that. And Teddy Roosevelt did it. Franklin Roosevelt was amazing at it. Harry Truman was good at it. Lyndon Johnson, good. In your lifetime, who was born in 2008? If you're born in, President Obama was president. It was 2009. Probably for most, President Trump became president on January 20th, so most of you probably Trump. President Obama was very careful about what he said. President Trump is not. You know, he says a lot, but he also understands that it's going to be reported. He also understands, and if there's something happens today, he'll say something tomorrow and distract from what he said today. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Oh.
He's very, and he understands that. He understands that ability to be constantly in the news, constantly using his power to persuade. Good or bad, he understands it. And since he will say some stuff that's pretty outrageous, then they'll really report. So back to this. What is the legislative control? They can override a veto. Override a veto, but it requires 2/3 of the House and the Senate. So that almost never happens. All the president has to do is threaten a veto, and that probably stops a law. I'm threatening it, it'll go back. It's really hard to overturn a veto. Rarely do presidents veto. Now they don't pass laws, so it almost never happens. But there are so few vetoes in your lifetime. I think there's only 4. Since 2009. Maybe 5. I'm trying to remember. That's almost none. Huh? President Jackson vetoed 8. Now it's first president to veto. So the first 6 presidents didn't even veto. You don't need to. Next. Appointments, like to the cabinet or to the cabinet or to be judges, have to be confirmed by the Senate. The Senate has to approve of everything from Secretary of State to highly ranking officials in the Park Service to Supreme Court judges. The Senate has to confirm. The Constitution says the Senate will advise and consent, and no one knew what that meant. They didn't know what it meant when they wrote it. They just thought they should put something down, not exaggerate. They should. Then they finally decided that's an up and down vote by the Senate. So that will come back to the judicial. And lastly, they can impeach. The House impeaches, but then it goes to a trial in the Senate. And it requires 2/3 of the Senate to remove somebody from office. The House impeaches on a straight up and down 50% vote, 50% plus. And the Senate trial. Okay. So it's really hard to impeach. Really hard. There's been presidents impeached. There have been 3 presidents impeached, but none have been removed from office. So in your lifetime, there has been 1 president impeached twice. President Trump was impeached twice by the House, but then it went to the Senate. And the first one, every Republican voted to acquit, essentially, because it's like a trial. Even though it's a purely political function, they act like it's a trial. They voted to acquit, so they didn't get the 2/3. The second impeachment, a number of Republicans joined in the vote. It was a clear majority, but not 2/3. So that's what happened there. So that was the impeachment in your lifetime. There's one other impeachment in my lifetime. Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton had lied about an extramarital affair. And they impeached him. And he was acquitted in the Senate.
Why is it impeached?
It's a purely political action, so the House can impeach for any reason they want to. Anything they want to, yeah. Okay, Nixon almost certainly would have been impeached, and there's a good chance he would have been convicted, but he resigned before that. Yeah, good question. It's because he might have been, the evidence was just so overwhelming. We'll get to it, but it's called Watergate, but he basically tried to wiretap the Democratic National Committee headquarters, try to use the power of the presidency to undermine his opponents.
Really spying.
Yeah, try to spy. They were so unhappy they didn't know. The first president to be impeached was for real reason. Anybody know the first president to be impeached? Andrew Jackson. Did I say Andrew Jackson? Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson was Lincoln's vice president, and he actively disobeyed law. He would not enforce the Reconstruction. And since he did that, that would be impeached. One vote short. One vote short. So it's really hard to impeach. Madison thought impeachment would happen all the time, and they believed the big thing would be corruption. Either for example, the president would use their office to try to be reelected, or the president would use their office to get rich. Like if all of a sudden the president gets super rich while they're in office, that's pretty, that would be seen as corruption by the founding fathers. So, impeachment. The checks are pretty limited. Okay, let's get to here. Let's get to the executive, the judicial. They appoint the judges. But don't forget, they have to be confirmed. They appoint the judges. How long is a term? Or they resign, either resign or lifetime. So a president could appoint a judge and they could be long gone. And that judge would still be there influencing policy. Most famously, 1801, John Adams, who was a member of what's called the Federalist Party, appointed John Marshall to be Chief Justice. And he'd be Chief Justice for 35 years. Adams was dead for a decade when he resigned. And the Federalist Party had been gone for 20 years. His own party, yet a Federalist Chief Justice still was influencing. So a president, if they appoint somebody young, they could be there long after they're gone. President Trump has appointed three members of the Supreme Court, and two of them when they were late 40s. I mean, they could realistically be on there for 30 to 45 years. They could be on there long after President Trump is there. Maybe me, but quite possibly me, and you guys will be near retirement age, and they can still be on. Something to contemplate. That's power. So that's a big deal. And they claim not to be political. Of course they're political. Of course, just any look at the Supreme Court through its entire history. So, what here? They literally create the court system. They create the federal courts, the appellate courts, and the Supreme Court. They can lay out what the Supreme Court does and the number of members of the Supreme Court or any other courtship. This is all created by the court. They create the courts. Congress creates it. The Judicial Act of 1789 created the court system that the basics of that we still follow to this day. And there's any number of members the Congress wants. If they vote for it, signed by the president, can be on the Supreme Court. There's been anywhere from 7 to 11 members of the Supreme Court. What have we been for the last 140 years? 9. We've had 9 for the last 140 some years. Even though the country is about 8 times bigger than the last time they changed. Heck, when Andrew Johnson was president, Republicans took away one judgeship so he couldn't appoint one. But as soon as Ulysses S. Grant became president, they brought it back. So this has always been political. There's been no serious effort to increase the number of members of the Supreme Court since 1937. So that's something, I don't know. We have 350 million people. Might be time to change. But that's great influence. And they can impeach. And they confirm. That's supposed to be confirmed. Just go with it. The last judge, Supreme Court justice to be impeached was in 1804. That's a few years. I can barely remember it. And then, yeah, even if there's been clear corruption, wow, the Supreme Court has had some corruption. There's no check in the Constitution. The court gave themselves a check, and it's called judicial review. For both of them. There are checks on both. Judicial review. Don't write down judicial review, then I'll explain. I think you want that squirrels. I'm getting tired of 8 questions. We should go 18. But that's need more for me to do. So, or for River to do. So, judicial review is checking the constitutionality of either laws or actions. Everyone check that, the constitutionality of laws or actions. So the Supreme Court gave them the power to look, if a law makes it to the Supreme Court, they can check the constitutionality of the law. Or if an action, like the president, they can look at executive orders. They can look at that. And this is not in the Constitution. There was an element of this that was a tradition in British common law, but it's not there. So they gave themselves this, and for the next 60 years after they did it, it wasn't widely accepted. And nobody believed the court system applied to the states. That's only just federal. After the Civil War, it began to believe that they could do state and federal. And today, it's generally accepted, even though very controversial. The current Supreme Court has used judicial review more than any other court in history. No court is even close to what they're doing. And it's remarkable, whether you agree or disagree, it's just unprecedented. How much they've thrown out laws, court precedents, or allowed for, or disallowed for presidential action. It's never been happened before. Some are unreal. Yeah.
What are the requirements?
You get appointed. You can be an idiot bum without a degree or idiot bum with a law degree, but it doesn't matter. Anybody can be president. Now, they have to be confirmed by the Senate. Now, it seems like everyone has to be, they always appoint someone who's a judge, and they seem to have always gone to Ivy League schools. And yeah, if you find out that most bad decisions have been made by Ivy League. And a lot of good ones. But that's kind of the prerequisite, but there's no big meeting. There's no big meeting. Alive and over through. Okay. So you guys gotta win. Who knows? Maybe my appointment's coming. I have a classmate who's a federal attorney. High school classmate. Yeah. So that's the system. That everyone got it down? You feel confident with it? Are you ready to reproduce this next Tuesday in a quiz?
Yeah.
So when I do this on Tuesday, I'm gonna put it on the wall, I'm gonna put it up overhead slide, put it up, well, I'll put it on screen. And you have to go 2 powers for both the executive and judicial, and 2 powers for the executive and legislative. That's easy, right? And then 1 check for each one. The check, 1 check for the executive, for the legislative, and vice versa. And the checks for the Supreme Court's pretty easy, right? Judicial. That's all. Just the basics, just so we have a good background, you kind of remember it. Tuesday will take you no more than, meaning you have 4 minutes to do it. If it takes you more than 4 minutes, you're gone. Sound good? Tuesday? Everyone have it? Feel confident? All right, let's get to a few more things really quick. So everybody write down federalism. Federalism is a form of government they created. Comment. October 11th. Just naming dates.
Anyway, second.
It's coming, give it a sec. Everyone act busy if someone walks by. Okay, federalism. And what federalism means is that there are a top-down tiered form of government. And on top is the national government, and that's why we call it the federal government, from federalism. So federalism is the national government is on top and is supreme. And so they have certain powers enumerated in the Constitution, but those powers that go to the federal government go to the state. They get the remaining powers. And so that's federalism. And there are a lot of countries that are federal. For example, Canada, the provinces have like a disproportionate amount of power. The states in the US have less power. But, Germany has stopped, same kind of thing. Almost everyone's a federal state in some way. Certain powers. Some federal government more, some federal government less. And then state governments have the same thing, local governments under them. So who mentioned police? Yeah. So we got the police. We have federal police force. They have certain powers. And then we have state police force. We have a Bureau of Investigation. We also have Highway Patrol. And then we have counties, one local form, Sheriff's Department, and then city police. And they all have certain areas that they have power. And most laws that affect us are state laws, but there's also individual city laws, and there's different laws in the county. Most of the different counties share like land use, but still they exist. But like most things that you think of for criminal offenses are state law. Murder, any crime, anything, property crime, they're all state. And there's the federal umbrella is in states is either very particular laws or kidnapping. Kidnapping is federal. Charles Lindbergh's baby.
Charles Lindbergh.
We'll get to him. First man to fly solo across the Atlantic. So he became the most famous person in the world. 1927. The next day. And his child was kidnapped and became international news. They turned into a federal crime. He would later become a pro-Nazi sympathizer in a group called American First. We have an interesting history. Moving on, but the necessary and proper clause really throws a monkey wrench in it. Because that gives the federal government more power. So you can imagine there's going to be a constant conflict between these two. A constant conflict. And let me get to a few more things about the kind of government they create. Oh, you can amend the Constitution. But it's really, 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 really hard. 2/3 of Congress and the president's signature, and then 3/4 of the states. That's why we've only had 27 amendments, and 11 of them were written by James Madison himself. The 27th Amendment was written by James Madison. It took 200 years to be ratified. We'll get to that one. Get to it. It's about payment of members of Congress.
Boring thing.
Huh?
Boring.
But nothing controversial will get ratified. Nothing controversial. So last couple things. So we created a republic, government by representation. We call it a democratic republic, even though by no means did the United States Constitution create a democratic republic. Most people could not vote, and those who could vote could only vote for members of the House. And today, the voting is very unequal. We talked about the Electoral College. So there's some issues there. Also, they did not want a democratic republic. The definition they would have thought of democracy was majority rule. And they did not want the majority of people to rule. They wanted a small little group. Remember what Madison told the New York Assembly. We won't have factions based on property. You will be protected. Vote for it. And okay, we don't know if it worked or not. You're going to have to read about 5 of the Federalist Papers in AP government if you take it. They talked a lot about government of a better sort and to protect the minority over and over. And you'll see this protecting the minority, protecting the minority, protecting the minority. Soon, protecting the minority will be protecting the minority section in the South who have slaves. That's coming down the road. By the way, that's the Roman Senate. Pretty cool, huh? Painted that myself. The Roman Senate?
Chairs.
Would be in the forum and the buildings are all collapsed. So they want as many barriers as possible. Think about it for a second. The president, the people don't vote for. The Senate, the people didn't vote for it till 1914 was the first election. And courts, lifetime. Terms, you can have an absolute bum and everybody knew it. But it's almost impossible to impeach. So you got to wait until they're done with their term. You're stuck with them. Nobody else has strict terms as the US. There's no right to vote in the United States Constitution. They did not write it in. Is there a right to vote today? No, there's no right to vote. Could they get an amendment passed? That needs an amendment. It would not pass. Women aren't guaranteed equal rights in the United States Constitution today. And it was not get a vote that alone pass the United States Constitution. It would not pass. Would not even come close to this. Not even close. It was no chance. And the president would not sign it. No chance. Kind of interesting. I know what you're saying. That's only 55% of the population. I know. Property, though, is protected. And that's a big deal when we come down the road towards slavery. And lastly, last thing for today, they wanted no radical change. It's really hard to change laws. It's really hard to, you have to wait to vote every 2 or 4 years or 6 years. It's hard, can't get rid of judges. It's impossible to pass a law, impossible to amend it. If you can't change the government today, it's really hard to change. Who will be in power tomorrow?
Children.
The same kind of people. Remember that word I gave you before when I talked about treaties? This system guarantees, write this last thing down, the status quo. Have you ever looked at members of Congress today? Have you guys noticed the age of the people who have been president for the majority of your life? It's really hard for younger people to get power, especially in one of the two parties. Now, I'm old. There's nothing wrong with being old. But it's really hard to change because they don't want to change. It's really difficult. And I'm blaming Jack.
Oh, of course, fun fact. Jack didn't even catch a single.
Hey, would you like some homework?
No.
Did I give you the homework? Did I forget to give you the homework?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, I'll give you homework. 264 to 293 in America. I originally put Thursday, but guess what day we're gonna do it?
Friday.
Wednesday. Friday. 264 to 293. Did I see that beginning of class? Did everyone write that down?
No.
264 to 293.
It's some sport. Jack didn't even catch a single fish.
Yeah, we really have
Me blinding when I'm in the state.
Good, you got it. Huh?
Did you think about
Huh?
Did you? I think we should make some more statements.
I took his hand the first time in 1992, and I took his hand the second time. The first one is running for president.
This is for my charity.
And the second time he was running,
One person.
he was a primary representative exposed between Hillary Clinton and Obama. So he gave the campaign to Montana. So he got close to the campaign in Montana. And then the election was really close. And the Democrat finally in Montana, so he became the Montana for Obama. See. Yeah. So it was one of those strange little words he came twice.
Oh.
But, and President Obama came here, not help, but he came to Montana. He went, he. He wasn't much. Yeah.
Why, I can't remember. Oh, that's a chick sheet.